Greetings, everyone. Good evening. It is a great pleasure to be back here, and I'd like to begin by thanking Lynn and Loretta and Rosie, who has been a real stalwart for Benjamin Lay. Is Dave Wormeling here?
He's helping people park, but he'll be in shortly.
Okay. I wanted to thank Dave especially because the first time I came to this meeting house, it was Dave who showed me around the grounds and told me that in his quite knowledgeable opinion, Benjamin and Sarah Lay are buried just beyond the wall of this extension of the building. So, can you feel Benjamin's spirit? You feel his spirit? I feel it. So it's a great pleasure to be here on the occasion of the publication of this book. What I want to do tonight is to tell you what I consider to be a truly epic story. And the story goes like this. Almost 300 years ago, in a time when slavery was an almost universally accepted institution, a man, an ordinary working man, not a highly educated elite, a working man who was barely 4 feet tall, bore witness against this very popular institution called slavery. He doggedly and eloquently denounced slavery and called for its immediate abolition. At a time when very few other people were doing that. He actually became an abolitionist in 1718. That's a good 2.5 generations before the Enlightenment was supposedly going to produce an anti-slavery movement. But this man arrived at the conclusion slavery must be abolished now. In order to do that, he felt he had to fight a battle among the Quakers. He was a devout Quaker, Benjamin Lay. But he lived in a time when a great many Quakers owned slaves. When he arrived in Philadelphia in 1732, more than half of the members of the Philadelphia Monthly Meeting owned slaves. A majority of people owned slaves. And the wealthiest Quakers, and Quakers had grown wealthy on the lands and commerce of Pennsylvania, owned quite a few slaves. And so Benjamin Lay had the courage to attack those wealthy Quakers repeatedly and to say that what they were doing was wrong. He suffered their wrath for doing this. He suffered quite extreme persecution. He suffered repression, but he never backed down. And over the course of his lifetime, he fought slavery for 41 years. Over the course of his lifetime, he finally persuaded the Quakers that this institution had to be abolished. And Quakers then became the first group in modern history to outlaw slavery within their own ranks. That is a great achievement. And all Quakers, and in fact all people, ought to be proud of it. But Benjamin Lay suffered because he was arguing for this long before it became a popular idea. Okay, so this is the epic story. An ordinary person who fights this terrific battle and in the end persuades people, helps to persuade people that something very, very serious must change. Now, admittedly, Benjamin's means of persuasion were unusual. You know what I mean? I'll just give you a couple of examples. One of them probably occurred very near this building. After a snowstorm, Benjamin positioned himself along the way where all Quakers were coming to meeting. And he uncovered his left leg and just put it in a snowbank. And just stood there, not saying anything. And person after person stopped and expressed their concern and said, Benjamin, what are you doing? You're going to get sick. You're going to catch cold. You mustn't do that. And he would listen, and then he would always respond, you express compassion for me, but you have no compassion for your slaves who go half-clad in this very cold winter. And then another instance of his means of persuasion. This is a story about two children. One of them was a little girl from West Africa who was owned by a neighbor of Benjamin, a man and a woman, both Quakers. And Benjamin tried to argue with them about how it was morally wrong for them to hold this little girl in slavery, in bondage. They not only refused his arguments, they justified the practice. So Benjamin decided that he needed to make a point. So he knew the little boy who belonged to this couple. Children in those days had a lot more freedom, working on family farms than they do today. So Benjamin used to see this little boy everywhere at their home, out on the roads, everywhere. And he met the young boy one day, and he invited him back to his cave. And the little boy came, and I guess he'd probably been there before. He certainly knew Benjamin very well, and I'm sure he knew what everybody else knew, that Benjamin was very well known for his love and care of children. So Benjamin entertained the boy all day, and at the end of the day, his parents come running saying, oh Benjamin, our child is gone. We haven't seen him all day. And they were terribly upset. Benjamin listened to them in a very kind of feeling way. And then he said, your boy is safe at my place. He says, but now can you imagine how the parents of that young girl you own must feel? For their child was torn away by avarice, pure greed. Now, I wanted to take care to mention this story because this story is sometimes presented as a kidnapping. It could not be further from a kidnapping. This was a loving relationship that Benjamin Lay had with a neighbor's child. But it was also a way for him to drive home a central argument against slavery, which was the golden rule. Do unto others as you would have them do unto you. And this was a fundamental part of Benjamin Lay's belief. He wanted to say to these parents, how would you like for your own child to go missing one day and be enslaved? These are his means of persuasion. Okay, so that's a brief introduction of Benjamin Lay. Let me tell you what I want to do in this talk. I want to answer several questions. I want to talk a little bit more about who Benjamin Lay was. I want to talk about his life. He had an unusual life. And I want to use that story of his life to pose a question. How did he manage to break through the almost universally accepted belief that slavery was natural? That's the way most people thought about it at that time. How did he break through? What were his experiences that allowed him to do something that very few other people managed to do? Along the way of explaining that, I want to talk about how I wrote this book. I want to talk about the sources. I want to talk about the research, a little bit about the writing. And in the end, I want to pose another question, which is, you already, I think, have a sense of what an unusual person Benjamin Lay was. So the question is, why is he almost totally unknown to the American public? I mean, this man should be a hero. But almost no one knows about him. Some people here know the local history. Some historians know about him. Not many, to be honest. But the general public knows almost nothing. Why is that? Leads us into a very interesting question about the politics of historical writing. Now, here's the cover of my book, and I want to actually begin by having you note the portrait and say that we are very happy to have with us today the two gentlemen, Pat Bell and Ed Hild, who found the portrait. They found the portrait that is now in the National Portrait Gallery. I think it was found in 1977, am I right? So perhaps during the Q&A we can talk with them, because in meeting with them before this started, I already learned new things about the portrait, which are very important. So